Hi everyone, and welcome back to another session of Landscapes 2, The Natural World. This is part 2, and in this section of the lecture I'm going to be talking a little bit about particularly the way that nature is treated in the Augustan period by the imperial apparatus, so the Augustan conception of the natural world and how that shows up in art. And this is to sort of create a baseline that we can work from in looking at the way that representations of the natural world then developed in later years of the Roman Empire. So if we return to a work that we have seen before, the Ars Pacis Augusti. So this is the altar in Rome set up, dedicated by the Roman Senate in honor of Augustus. And if we look closely again at this image that we saw from the east facade of the Ara Pacis, we have this goddess here, either maybe peace or an earth goddess, suckling twins. And then if you look at the way that nature is represented, we sort of have characteristics that pertain to all of the various spheres of the natural world brought together in harmony in this composition. So we have water down here with a sort of sea serpent coming out, so representing the sort of sphere of the water. Then we have this avian sphere over here, the sphere of the air, and then we have all sorts of growing things of different species growing up around the sides in this sort of active abundance. We've got a rocky cliff back here representing the sort of rockiness of the earth. So we have land, sea, and air. We have agricultural productivity. We have herding activities down here, right? So as well representing the sort of pastoral aspect of the Roman world. And so when we think about the way that Augustus treated representations of nature, he's really drawing on this very long history in the Roman world of a society that is very much rooted in agricultural practice, right? So as we talked about sort of classes of citizenry last week, some of those classes were based on property ownership, with the highest classes reserved for those who own a lot of land in particular. So land ownership is this very traditional way of making money. It's sort of morally acceptable to be a farmer. There's very much an attitude of the sort of rolling up the shirt sleeves by many of the politicians in the late Roman Republic and Roman Empire, where they're hearkening back to these traditional values of the agricultural landscape of being a productive person. So when we see Augustus, who is also someone who really emphasized traditional family values, having lots of children, keeping your marriages strong, not being adulterous. We also see Augustus sort of using the natural world and natural abundance and the fluorescence of many different kinds of sort of natural resources and their availability as another signal that is adopted in order to show the sort of traditional values of the imperial state, a return to what is most important and most morally correct about Roman society. So we see that reflected in some of the iconography from the Ara Pacis. And another part of this monument that we looked at a bit before were these floral reliefs that go around the outside of the altar on all sides and run beneath the processional friezes on the long sides of the altar. And in these floral designs, we see plants of many types growing simultaneously and also multi-seasonality represented here. So the basic sort of curling motif is drawn off of the acanthus plant, like the Corinthian column tops that we've seen, column capitals. But then we also here, we can see bunches of grapes growing off of here. So that's an autumnal fruit, different season, but still flourishing at the same time. So this sort of abundance where nature is so harmonious that it actually, the seasonal differences are all sort of simultaneously represented as flourishing in abundance at once in this ageless, wonderful new world of Augustan values. If we look at another piece of this relief, I think I showed you this little excerpt. Here we are very low down on the altar at the very base of that floral relief, and you can see a serpent crawling out of the acanthus leaves at the bottom here to attack this nest of baby birds, with one baby bird about to sort of hop off and escape. So we also see a really lively, not just plant species, but a lively sort of hidden representations of birds and insects, of serpents, so ground animals, wild animals that would be frequently inhabiting. Here we have another little salamander up here, inhabiting these plant spaces, and again, having the fauna added in as a way of further emphasizing the sort of cycles of birth and abundance that are going on in these panels. One final thing to look at in the Arapakis before we move on to another monument is these garlands on the interior of the altar. So here we have our bucrania, these bulls' heads, bull skulls that have ritual associations in the Roman sphere. And then we have garlands that again mix fruits from various seasons. Here we can see pine cones, we can see like apples and pomegranates, grapes, bunches of grapes again. So defying the sort of natural rhythms of seasonality in order to assure an abundance that goes beyond the power of nature. So the imperial state at this time is really using that kind of Apadana-esque imagery where having sort of control and harmonious relationships with the natural world is a way of representing both the power of the state and also the sort of well-being of the people who accept the state. So we see a lot of this in Augustan art. Another example that is more associated with the wife of the emperor, Livia, comes from a villa just outside the boundaries of the city of Rome at a spot called Prima Porta. And this villa was owned by the family of Augustus's wife, Livia. And Livia, as a child, there was a story that circulated about her that she had been sitting at this villa outside, and an eagle dropped a hen into her lap, like a little baby hen, passing overhead, and the hen was clutching a sprig of laurel in its beak. And so this was a really great omen, and the decision that was made after consulting with some of the sort of religious authorities was that she should plant that sprig of laurel and grow a grove out of it. And that grove grew to be the sort of official victory wreath laurel grove of the Augustan imperial family. So it became very successful. And then suddenly, by legend, it also died and withered once that dynasty ended after Emperor Nero. So this villa was actually named after that incident. So it is called the Villa ad Gallinas Albas, at the White Hens. So that is after that hen that was dropped into Livia's lap. And this basement room is one of the entertainment spaces at this imperial property. And what we see is that you would come down the stairs into this sort of barrel vaulted space with a window that is round about at ground level. So it lets in natural light, but also maintains the coolness of the space relative to the rest of the villa surrounding it. And in this room, once you enter, there's this atmospheric garden painting that wraps around all four sides of the space. And it's really carefully and beautifully painted. It ends up once again sort of emphasizing these Augustan ideals of having fruitfulness, of having a sort of bountiful control over nature, but with some interesting sort of acknowledgments of the way in which the picture might be a little bit more complicated, and some of the sort of latent danger that we see in the natural world. So nowadays you can visit these paintings in the National Archaeological Museum at Palazzo Massimo in Rome. Hopefully again someday. And when you walk into the museum space, you are sort of taken aback by both the size of the room, it's pretty impressively large, and as well as the brightness and richness of the color of the walls. And so as we look here, I'm going to go on to the next slide because this is a drawing that makes it a little bit clearer so I can break down the image for you. Around the top edge of the entire room, we have these interesting sort of rocky crags that you see, which gives a sense of you being actually within a sort of cave, like a rocky outcropping grotto space. And that, of course, is going to resonate with the temperature of being semi-underground in a basement room. So as you look out from underneath these eaves, which surround you, so it's a little bit spatially odd in the sense that there's no rock wall anywhere behind you. It's just open on all sides, a floating rocky cover, if you will. What you will see first, and the sort of first register that is closest to you as the viewer in the center of the room, is this small sort of wicker fence. And then that fence bounds this area of really beautifully trimmed grass, of evenly spaced plants that are sort of alternating in their form to form a pleasing sense of both variety but also rhythm and repetition across the space. On all four walls we have cut out niches in this second, looks like a marble low parapet wall. And in those niches are different forms of trees, both evergreens and fruit trees, all of which are laden heavily with sort of bounteous, beautiful fruits. Behind that garden, sort of controlled garden space register, we have a more wild atmospheric area where we have more fruit trees that are equally abundant, populated with winging and perched birds on all sides and areas. We have intense sort of flowers growing up from behind this little low marble wall, and then they sort of fade out into the distance, giving you the impression of a space that really extends far away and a sort of unending garden area out towards the blue sky behind. So when you're in this room, I'm just going to go on to another image that you can see of another tree. You really get a sense of being in a garden space. It is a fairly relatively convincing trompe l'oeil effect here, but at the same time there's a really interesting contrast drawn between the controlled, fenced-in inner space of the garden world and then this sort of wilder, equally bounteous but less controlled, less perhaps human-friendly and impenetrable green space that exists just outside the delineated garden walls. Another interesting little, here's just another example of one of the end walls of the space so that you can see another tree here, more of these evenly spaced flowering plants, more birds and fruit trees in the background. And then if we look at this little detail here, so this is on the wall that is opposite the doorway when you walk in and a little bit to the left of the viewer on that opposite wall. Just one little human detail added in here is this bird cage, which is perched on the marble wall. So we have all of these free-wheeling birds perched in nature of all different sort of species and types that might have been common. And then we have this sort of indication of the cage and the way that, again, humans can have control over the natural world. We have a really interesting, harmonious relationship with a domesticated form of nature that has opened up her abundance to us as Augustan people and given us the power to understand that. Now, just quickly at the end of this, to move a little bit away from that Augustan abundance and away from some directly imperial properties, here we have a stucco relief fragment from the Villa Farnesina. This is a very elite property of Rome of the late 1st century BC, so still in this Augustan period. And the reason that I wanted to show you this example is just to highlight that even outside of these imperial and state contexts, we have a palm tree, we have a tree with no leaves, we have a tree with leaves, all in this little sacro-idyllic scene. So there's sort of a continuous emphasis on the way that exotic flora and fauna and different seasonalities can kind of coexist in the visual realm. A little bit of a complicating factor that shows up in some other Augustan properties are these mythological paintings in the third style. So the central panels in those restrained third style paintings that we've looked at before. In this case, these are both from one of the villas at Bosco Trecase, the sort of fancier villa at Bosco Trecase. And this is just outside of Pompeii in Italy. And here what we see are tiny mythological figures that are really dwarfed by the landscape. So a bit of that sort of atmospheric wilderness that is in the Livia Prima Porta garden paintings as well, showing up in these mythological paintings, a hint at the way that nature can remain dangerous and frightening. So here's just some more examples. I'm out of time. So what I want you to do is just to choose one example of the representation of the natural world from your chosen Pompeian house. If there are none, here's a couple of other houses that you might look at and describe it. Tell me the medium, the placement, the composition, the iconography. Just choose one. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next set of lectures.